So it's a really exciting day for me today because I'm planting out my early brassicas. Now, I generally find my kales are starting to all go to seed about sort of now, kind of, late March, April time, and pretty much finished by May. So I need a new supply of kales and also, all sorts of other lovely leafy greens. So I'll show you what I'm planting today. So a selection of lovely reflex curly kale, a few cauliflowers. I am actually going to put in some red cabbages. Now I'm not expecting these to heart up by the time I clear the bed, because I will clear the bed in July, but I am expecting a decent leaf crop, and I love red cabbage leaves, even though they might not be tightly curled. Loads of lovely Tuscan kales, and there's quite a variety there. There's some dazzling blue and some, I forgot what it's called now, bear with me, black magic. Yeah, really perfect for the hungry gap. And some red kales and just a few more dwarf green curly kales. So quite a nice selection there. So just talk a little bit about the logic behind such an early planting. So I sowed these back in January, and as I said, I'm planting them out now, and it's the beginning of March. The weather's starting to turn nice and sunny, and real benefit is, as I say, I'm harvesting at least the kales in May, and it gives me the perfect kind of opportunity to prepare a bed for purple spread and broccoli, which I'll be planting in July. Now I will be planting brassicas after brassicas, but I don't mind that because I would otherwise be just leaving these kales in all year anyway. So all I'm doing is just swapping one brassica for another brassica, but it means that the bed has kind of acclimatized to brassicas. So last year it was beetroot, then it was field beans, and so now it's brassicas, and it'll be brassicas all year into spring next year. So I'm just snipping off the field beans just below the soil level so they don't regrow. Field beans are kind of my favourite go-to crop for any bed that I'm going to be clearing really at this time of year, because there's very few other crops that you can get a decent harvest from outside at this time. But these little growing tips off the field beans are a great harvest all the way through winter. And whilst I'm harvesting the tops, the bacteria on the roots are working away, fixing nitrogen, which I'm now leaving in the soil because I'm leaving the roots in the soil. I mean, it is a bit of a fiddle just clearing it like this. It's a slow job, but I think it's worth it. The soil stays completely undisturbed, and the nitrogen is fixed in the soil, and the root mass gets to just rot down as well. And it's a common myth really that beans always fix nitrogen in the soil. They only really fix it when you harvest the beans before they start to flower, because as soon as that flowering process starts, the bean plant starts to draw that nitrogen out of the soil and use it for the flowering and bean making process. And by the time you're ready to harvest the beans, all of the nitrogen in the roots, or on the roots more accurately, has been depleted. But the roots are still there to rot down. Now as I'm clearing this, I'm slightly disappointed because there's still whitefly on these beans, and I am going to be putting brassicas back in this bed and obviously brassicas and whitefly don't exactly go well together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spray the surface of the bed with pyrethrum, which is an organic insecticide, which might knock back the whitefly a bit. And then I'm going to mulch over with an inch of fresh compost, which will kind of trap the whitefly underneath the compost layer, because they're currently kind of sitting here on the soil surface. And then just hope for the best. Nothing else I can do. This is the only bed I've got to put my brassicas in. So I just have to cope with whatever gardening throws at you in that way. Maybe one thing I could do, in theory, would be to just leave this bed fallow for a week or so. But today's the day, really, I've got earmarked to replant. And the plants are ready to go out, really. I don't want to leave them for much longer, because I kind of get stressed in the pots and probably end up going to seed early if I don't plant them now. Because now the weather's warming up, they really don't want to be sitting in pots in a polytunnel. They want to be in the ground. There we go, all done. Kind of weeded as I went along, so it's not too bad. So I'm using a lot more of my own homemade compost now. I used to mainly use it in containers, but I've been working on trying to make it more weed free and higher quality, and hopefully you can see maybe at that distance it's looking quite nice now. So I'm only putting like a maximum of 1 inch of compost on top of my beds now, because I've been putting a couple of inches a year for about 5 years now, which is how long I've been gardening. So there's plenty of compost, no shortage. But yeah, it's looking good. So I'm going to put a lot of brassicas in here, all sorts, different kales, calabrese, Brussels sprouts, all sorts of things, all for early harvest in the Hunger Gap. So I'm just making my holes with my trusty bulb planter. And I'm putting about 9 plants per square metre in, which is quite high density, and it's probably more than you would do if you weren't planning to take these plants out in sort of June, July, well, late June, early July. These are just my earlies. So it's worth noting that although I think this early planting is really great and well worth doing, that there is a downside to it, and that is that these plants will tend to go to seed a little bit earlier than plants that are put in May, which is my kind of preferred time for most brassicas. Not, as I say, not this early sowing. But I don't mind about that, because, as I say, I'm taking these plants out before they go to seed in kind of June, July, so I can get my purple sprouting broccoli in. So that's dwarf green curly kale, and this one is scarlet, which is a red curly kale. Really gorgeous stuff. I know a lot of people say they don't like kales, but there's so many different kales. You know, so many different tastes, so many different textures, that it's kind of worth trying, because they're just so much more productive, really, I think, than any of the other, well, not maybe any of the other brassicas, but most of the other brassicas. By the time these are finished, we'll mainly actually be eating Brussels sprout leaves and colette leaves rather than kale, although we will still have some kale. But we are massive fans of those plants, and of course all those leaves kind of go to waste because they all kind of fall off over time. So we try to eat them when they're nice and small, and well before they fall off through age. And just taking like 1 or 2 leaves per plant per week, it doesn't seem to have much of an effect on their vigour. And we've certainly got plenty of colettes on the plants that are behind me at the moment. So for me it's kind of a win-win, you know, that I get the kales out the way nice and early, then I switch to the Brussels and the colettes, and then I kind of switch back to kales again in autumn when more people are eating brassicas, and so we're getting through more, and the Brussels and the colettes can't keep up, and then we're kind of back to eating the actual sprouts and the flower sprouts off the colettes in winter, and then we kind of get a new flush of kale in late spring, or mid-spring rather, and then we get these plants in late spring. So there we go, that's all planted, and I've just moved this cover off one of the winter lettuce beds and spinach beds, and that will just get a bit of fleece on it in a minute. I'll show you that in a second. So I'll just give you a bit of a close-up of these. So I think they're looking great. And then down here we've got little Brussels sprout plants for the leaves, and then calabrese and cauliflowers down to the end there. And they are really benefiting from these covers. The only thing is, you do have to be on good terms with your plot neighbour when you kind of plant right up to the edge like this, because I'm standing on somebody else's plot. So this is the bed that I'm going to fleece, and I'll probably only need to fleece this for March, and it's a quick and easy job. And you know, these brassicas are worth a lot more to me than these lettuces and spring onions, so and that spinach. And these covers will probably stay on for about 6 weeks. Swap over to this sort of cover to keep the pigeons off. So, hope you like this quick video. My name's Steve, this is the Seaside Kitchen Garden and Allotment channel, and I'll see you soon.